Today's lecture is going to be part 2 on French art of the 18th and 19th centuries. In part 1, we discussed the Rococo style, of which a great example of that is Fragonard's The Swing. We also talked about neoclassical art, which my example for that would be Jacques-Louis David's The Oath of the Horatii. And today we're going to be talking about Romanticism and also later in the lecture, Realism. Romanticism is something that existed simultaneously with neoclassicism. And for the first time in this course, we don't see art in a linear progression. This is rather art that exists side by side with another style. So where we kind of moved from Rococo art into neoclassical art, here neoclassical and Romanticism exists side by side. We have artists that are contributing to both styles. Romanticism deals with the exploration of emotion, expression, and imagination. The subject matter can come from a variety of sources, including literature, current events, and even the artist's own imagination. We see Romanticism in France, in England, and for the first time, we're going to be branching out into America. The time period for Romanticism begins in the late 1700s and ends in the early 1800s when we see Realism take over. Now, even though Jacques-Louis David is considered perhaps the most important painter of the neoclassical age, he also did romantic paintings, and this one definitely is overly expressive. Napoleon sat for this painting for a total of 2 hours, where David did several sketches of him, and then everything else, especially the horse, would definitely be romanticized. We've got this horse rearing up on his hind legs. It's got that wild look in his eyes. The breeze is blowing perfectly to where his tail and the hair on the mane is facing forward, which is where Napoleon is leading his troops up the Alps into Italy. Other leaders that have done that before him are seen on the rocks in the lower left-hand corner. Of course, Napoleon's name is going to be on top, followed by Hannibal, who is the military leader of Carthage, and then Charlemagne. But overall, we've got this really great painting, and it's huge when you see it in person. I stood in front of this painting probably 10 years ago, and it is a floor-to-ceiling painting, and it has definitely a sense of power and excitement when you get to see it in person. It's much better than seeing it on a computer monitor. But perhaps the seminal artwork of the Romantic age is the Raft of the Medusa, and it's by the artist Gericaulт, who unfortunately dies very young at the age of 33 after a horse riding accident. And so he only has a brief period as a painter, and this painting is by far his most famous. It does depict a real story that on July 2nd of 1816, there is this French ship called the Medusa, and it's off the coast of North Africa, and it encounters a storm and it begins to sink. There's not enough lifeboats for everyone on the ship. So the captain and the crew take the lifeboats. The captain has the ship's carpenter fasten together a raft for the rest of the passengers, which is about 150 people. The raft is attached to the lifeboats by ropes. However, the lifeboats can't get enough distance, and what happens is the captain orders the ropes to be cut to the raft. And there's only enough food on the raft for 1 day, along with 2 casks of water and 2 casks of wine. So you can imagine all the melee that went on this raft. There were horrible stories of murder, of cannibalism. The raft is at sea for 12 days. People are thrown overboard. It's just an awful situation. By the time this raft is rescued, and this is the scene that you see, is that they're trying to signal the Argus, which happens to be in the area. Only 15 of these people are going to survive out of the original 150. Only 12 of those make it to shore. Jericho and many other people become very obsessed with this story, but Jericho goes overboard. He goes as far as hiring the ship's carpenter to build him a replica raft in his studio so he could literally paint this from an actual raft. He contacted the survivors. He went to the morgue and got body parts to put around his studio to paint. He even attended the trial of the ship's captain. This painting is absolutely gigantic, and if we were in class, we would measure it out just so you could see how large of a mass this is. It is 16 feet high. It is 23 feet wide. It is the size of a history painting, even though it does depict a current event. And it was allowed into the Salon of 1819, but the name was not allowed to be shown, the title of the painting. And this is because the Bourbon monarchs who took over after the fall of Napoleon were in power. And this was a ship's captain that they appointed. And we start to see again that we have corruption in the government. It's letting us know that the French Revolution really failed us. And so that's what this painting is about. As we looked about earlier as well, and here's a couple preliminary studies and drawings of this painting. It is the antithesis of the Oath of the Horatii. And when you go to the Louvre and see these paintings, they are opposite the wall of one another. The only bad thing that I do have to tell you about the raft of the Medusa is that you can see at the very center of the painting there's some really dark shadowing by the mast on the raft. And the artist used bitumen of Judea, which is an asphalt compound, onto the canvas. And it's starting to eat away and destroy the canvas itself. And we're unsure how to stop it at this point. So there is a lot of conservation effort going toward this painting right now. When the monarchy returns to France, it's led by Louis XVIII as well as Charles X, and both of them made unpopular decisions in censoring the press, limiting the voting rights, and also returning education to the Catholic Church. This causes a large-scale uprising in the streets of Paris. It's going to overthrow the monarchy and put Louis Philippe into power. And what happens is we get this wonderful painting by Delacroix. And he's really the artist that leads the Romantic movement after the death of Géricault. You can see that these people are dressed up as students, craft workers. There's children and laborers involved. They're stumbling through the debris, the smoke, the barricades that have been put up, and of course the dead bodies. And they're coming right toward us. Their leader is this energetic, muscular, half-nude allegorical figure of Liberty herself, with a revolutionary flag in one hand and a rifle in the other. We can even see the towers of Notre Dame in the distance off to the right. So it's really a wonderful, powerful painting, and it is something that I want you to research more about. I did give a link on our website for our class for you to watch the video from Smart History about this painting. Delacroix is even more noted for this painting today, The Women of Algiers. And it was very common for artists of this age to visit the French colonies in North Africa. And so this is very much an image from that area. It showcases exotic painting, It showcases exotic patterns and colors, and Delacroix states, quote, "In the course of my African journey, I only began to produce something worthwhile when I had sufficiently forgotten the minor details and retained only the striking poetic details." Even though this gentleman visited North Africa in 1830, he paints this painting in 1832. So that's where we classify it as a romantic painting, because this is very much, even though he may have experienced this firsthand, it was very much his imagination and expression, him talking about his emotion through paint. We also have the artist Fuseli during this age. And the nightmare you'll see on a lot of covers of books of Gothic horror stories and such. This is the most famous work of Fuseli, but he does do 4 different versions of this painting. We've got this woman who has passed out on her bed. We've got this incubus sitting on her chest. We've got this horse with wild eyes again, looking out from some textiles toward the back of the room. Fuseli was someone who traveled extensively throughout Europe during his time, living well into his 80s. And John Singleton Copley is our first American artist that we're going to look at. So this is his work, Watson and the Shark, and it's presented to you in Havana Harbor. The person, Brooke Watson, is the gentleman that is swimming in the water off to the left, kind of like paralyzed with fright as this Jaws-like shark is going to attack him. And he really gets attacked by a shark. He loses his lower leg. I only have one picture of him as an adult, and he does have, very much like a pirate, he does have a peg leg, a wooden leg. But you'll see, again, very much a romantic type painting. And this is really, Copley is looked at as our first American painter. Although he was born in the colonies, he did spend most of his life in England, though. So there is still a European sensibility that's going to be present in his paintings. We also have a new type of printmaking process that comes around during this age. During the Renaissance, we talked about relief printing with woodcuts, wood engravings, and linocuts using wood or linoleum and printing from the positive space. We talked about intaglio printing, where we're using metal, usually copper or zinc, and we're creating the image by scooping out slivers of metal, so we're printing from the negative space here. But now we have lithography. And lithography is incredibly cool because it is printing from a flat surface, as you see in the image at the right. The process is invented in Bavaria in 1798, originally intended to reproduce sheet music. But artists quickly learned about this medium and definitely embraced it, because it's a medium for the everyday artist. We don't have to have special talent in terms of scooping out slivers of metal or chopping out pieces of wood. Instead, we're freehand drawing on this block of limestone. And the piece of limestone is a little bit larger than a sheet of paper. It's about 15 inches by 18 inches. And the medium that we use to draw with is something very much with the consistency of lipstick. There's a certain waxiness to it. Now, not only are we just drawing freehand onto this block of limestone, what happens if we make a mistake? With the other printmaking mediums, we either have to incorporate that mistake into our finished work, or we have to throw away the plate or the block of wood and start again. Here, if we accidentally do an extra column on that building in the center, or an extra wheel on that bicycle to the left, it's not a big deal. We just wipe off our drawing and then we redraw it. So mistakes are easily corrected. We coat the block with a couple of chemicals once we're happy with our image. The chemicals will help fix the image to the block, but also attract the ink to the waxiness of our drawing medium. And then we ink the block and we start printing. Since we don't have any surface that can be worn down, we can present or print thousands of images. Once we're done with our printing, we can wash off the chemicals and the image. We wet sand the block, and we can use that limestone again. So we can recycle that block. So we have some wonderful advantages with this new process. The printing surface is flat. We don't need any special talent to create the image. Mistakes are easily corrected. We can produce thousands of prints instead of just hundreds. And the lithographic stone can be reused. So lots of advantages with this process. And one of the more famous images is this one. And of course, Daumier is noted as one of the most important lithographers ever. Lithography was used to print images in newspapers and in magazines or circulars at the time. Rue Transnonain is based on a true event that happened on April 15th, 1834. On that night, a government guard was struck down by a sniper's bullet, and the shot appeared to have originated from this building with the address of 12 Rue Transnonain. The guards, in order to take revenge for their colleague's death, went inside and killed who they thought were the snipers. Unfortunately, they had the wrong address. So this print shows the bloody aftermath of the event. We've got this father lying in the center of the room, crushing his child underneath him, his wife off to the left, and one of their parents off to the right. Daumier also hated the King of France, King Louis Philippe, many times presenting him in a shape of a pear. And in this image, we have the French citizens off to the right putting their tax money into these baskets taken up into the mouth of King Louis Philippe by the legislature. And he is defecating out laws and bills. Daumier was thrown in jail a couple of different times by the king himself. And in this image, Daumier really tries to heighten the importance of printmaking. We see that in the background, we've got these individuals that have sculpture, they have paintings, but they're very much focused on their collection of prints. Just like the connoisseur here, paintings and sculpture in the background that he's admiring, but he has his trusty satchel of prints next to his chair. We also have, during this age, Goya becomes the court painter for the King of Spain. Goya is, of course, a Spanish painter, and just like Velasquez, who worked for Philip IV, Goya is going to work for Charles IV. And he's difficult to categorize as an artist because he does have a lot of different styles throughout his career. Neoclassicism, though, isn't one of them because that style just never caught on in Spain. And we'll take a look at his most famous works, which include Los Caprichos. Los Caprichos is actually a series of about 80 different etchings. And when you see this series in person, it's actually very small. You know, we normally see these images blown up on a screen or in a textbook, but here, these are in real life, they're about 3 inches by 4 inches in size. So they are very small, and many times when they're on display, they're also, when you go through the exhibit, they give you out magnifying glasses to look at all the details of these different etchings. Here it's basically letting us know that reason ignored is a sleeping monster. we have the slumbering personification of reason, haunted by a menagerie of owls and bats and even kind of a creepy looking cat off to the lower right. One of his larger paintings is very similar to Velázquez's Las Meninas. So this is the family of Charles IV. And the painting is 9 feet by 11 feet. This is the family, the true family, with the king standing just off-center to the right. But it's different than Las Meninas. You know, we see these paintings side by side here. And with Goya's version of the royal family, none of them looks very happy, like they want to even be in this painting. Goya hides himself in the back left-hand corner behind a canvas, very much like Velázquez's painting there at the right. And it looks like a totally unhappy painting, and even one of the women off to the left, 2 over from the queen, isn't even looking forward. The bottom line, though, is that this painting was still accepted by the royal family, but it really looks more like caricatures of these individuals. Goya is also famous for these black paintings, which he calls a world of terror and nightmare that portray the negative and unaccountable in human existence. These are non-commissioned paintings, so they weren't made for any specific person. They were produced in the later years of his life after he had gone deaf. And Goya did not title these paintings. Art historians did. But a lot of students very much like them, and a lot of students end up doing reports in my class about them. Now, the last painter I want to talk about of the Romantic era is a German painter, Caspar David Friedrich. And one of his most famous works is The Wanderer Above the Sea of Mist. And this is an artist who studied at the Copenhagen Academy. He's considered a romantic landscape painter. He felt that God was manifest in the landscape. And we look at very much a juxtaposition in his paintings. We see human existence, we see nature, we see the body and soul compared to the divine. So it's a really great series of paintings. He's a beautiful colorist. Monk by the Sea is an overwhelmingly sad painting. His father had just passed away when he completed this work. Look at that low horizon line and that dark sea, and even the area of land that this monk is standing on is desolate. There's no trees, there's no shrubbery, there's no grass. The monk himself is faceless, and we have this overwhelming sense of the sublime, this smallness of our human existence in the depths of nature. Friedrich had truly a very sad life. You know, he had a sister die when he was 8 years old. A few years later, when he was 12, he was ice skating and fell through the ice. And his brother tried to save him, but drowned in the process. And at 14, his other sister dies. So he had a horrible, horrible childhood growing up. He is an absolutely beautiful colorist. These paintings are fairly small. They are generally smaller than a standard sheet of paper. And most of the major museums have these works pretty readily available. You can see one coming up is from the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And that's this one here. And this is probably a 7-inch by 9-inch painting. I want to close out this lecture talking about realism, because this is really where we start to see a transition in art. Between 1830 and 1848, there was a call for social progress and an end to the economic, social oppression by one class over another. Here, people rely on physical, empirical, and scientific evidence as a way to understand the world. So instead of going from that Romantic era, we go to a very almost photographic-like quality image of how the world truly is. We see people working at their normal jobs. Usually these are laborers, very much a true depiction on the modern world. We don't have any subjects that are idealized or embellished. Courbet is probably the most famous artist of realism. In Burial at Ornans, we have this huge painting. It's about 10 foot by 22 foot, and it's filled with nearly 50 people. And it is about the artist's own death and his burial. We see his father standing to the right of the grave, the artist's dog to the right of that, his 5 sisters weeping in the background. And it's a very solemn painting. It's a very quiet painting. Even with this many people in the work, it's very, very quiet. But all of these people are recognizable people from the town of Ornans, where Courbet was from. Courbet says, painting is an essentially concrete art and can only consist in the representation of real and existing things. What happens with realism is that it kind of gets a bad rap because photography is invented in 1839, and no longer do we need an artist to replicate the world. Photography is going to do that for us. Easier, cheaper, and more accurate. And in order for art to survive, it needs to change or to transform into something different. And we're going to learn about Manet. We're going to learn about modern art from this point out. This is the last, realism is really the last of the very traditional art forms that we're going to see.